Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, welcome to this first Genspect USA webinar. This is the first in a series we'll be holding with issues that are relevant to parents and to schools. And boy, what an incredibly important issue to start with. It feels like it's been a crazy 24 hours, and I'm so pleased to be able to welcome two people who know as much about this as anyone in the country. The first is May Mailman, who's the director of the Independent Women's Law Center. And she's going to tell us all about the latest legal state of things. And then the amazing Jennifer Say, who is the former Levi's brand president and founder of XXXY Athletics, and a great champion of women's sports. So what I'd like to do is maybe. May, do you want to start us off and just give us the latest state of play? It seems like things are going back and forth every few hours. So just, let us know what to expect.
Yeah, so today is the official implementation date of Biden's illegal Title IX rewrite. Title IX is a 1972 law meant to give women equal opportunity in educational environments. People think it's for college. It's more than college. It's any school, any education program that accepts federal fund. That includes 4-H. I mean, if it's educational and if it takes federal dollars, it's touched by Title IX. So what this rewrite does, as I'm sure people are aware, a lot of things, very long, but in general, it says that sex discrimination means gender identity discrimination, which means that you have to treat people in accordance with their gender identity. A male wants to be in a female locker room, otherwise it harms their gender identity, gotta let them in. Bathrooms and so on, scholarships, sex ed classes, really the list goes on. So a lot of different states, a lot of different organizations, including the Independent Women's Law Center, challenged these regulations all across the country. Every single court, so there are now 8 courts to weigh in on, or I guess 9 courts to weigh in on the legality, that said, nope, it's not legal what they did, and 1 court to say, yes, it is legal. So that's not a good track record for the Biden administration, but where that puts us is 26 states have injunctions in place, every single state to challenge, actually, because the one court that said that this is legal got immediately paused by the appellate court. And then for the remainder of the country, the Title IX regs are taking effect, which I would say is pretty bold from the Biden administration to say that you have now 9 courts telling you what you're doing is illegal and you don't care and you're just going forward and implementing in the remainder of states. And even though today's the day for implementation, I still do expect some chaos because the Biden administration has asked the Supreme Court to weigh in and let them implement in more states. So, and the Supreme Court hasn't said what it's going to do yet. Who knows? Like, I bet that they're going to reject the government's request, but that still is to be seen. And then there are a couple of appellate courts that still are left to weigh in too. So a lot of different shifts happening, but essentially half and half in the country. Half are in status quo as it is, and half are men are now women.
Wow. I guess I guess I'd like to just get a sense of, is there some place where people can find out where their state stands?
So IWF does plan to have a clickable map that will be updated of, what is where. That said, I think there are 2 resources before we get that up. And so, keep checking IWF.org. That'll be up today.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, Ed Week, as in like Education Week, Ed Week has been doing a good job of tracking. And then also the Department of Education's own website has a list of states where they say that they're not going to implement. And I will say one other thing that IWF's website is going to include as well, which is there is currently one lawsuit out of the state of Kansas where 3 different organizations have gotten an injunction for their members. And so those members attend certain schools, and the Biden administration is not going to apply the Title IX rule in those schools. Now, that's one of these chaos ones where I'm not actually sure what the appellate court is going to do there. So that's currently with the 10th Circuit for review. But for now, there's also a specific list of schools where this Title IX rewrite is not going to take effect. And I think Moms for Liberty has been leading the charge there. So they're going to have a list on their website, and IWF will put that list on our website as well.
Great. And Jennifer, I mean, you've been somebody who's been very vocal about this and been very involved. Do you have any thoughts on today and how we're gonna?
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm very vocal is because I have common sense. That's the main reason. The second reason, I was an elite athlete as a child. I was an elite gymnast. I was on the national team for 7 years. And, I used to think, as we watched these Olympics, well, women's gymnastics would always be kind of safe. It's sort of tailored to women's strengths, flexibility, grace, all those things matter. I no longer think that, because the sport has now come down to power and strength, and it's how hard the skills are. And, I watched the team win gold 2 days ago, and they're amazing. But I then watched some of the men competing, and they can do the same skills with so much more ease. And so no sport is safe from this madness. And it's ironic that today, on the day the Title IX rewrite goes into effect, we watched a man beat the crap out of a woman at the Olympics, because the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is with the 24 states that think men can be women if they just say they're women. It is so egregious that this happened in boxing, the most dangerous sport for it to happen at the Olympics. It is not just about fairness, it is about safety of women. And anyone at this point who stands by and believes that allowing males who think they are females to compete against women is the right thing to do is an enemy to women. I'm sorry, they just are. They don't care about women, they don't care about women's rights, and they don't care about women's safety. So it's quite ironic. And, for the other side to continue to say, this is a fringe issue, it's happening at the margins, why are you so obsessed with these, trans-identified athletes? It's such a small issue. It isn't. It's on the Olympic stage. It's at the NCAA finals. It's at high school state track finals across the country. It is everywhere. As May well knows, there are over 700 examples in the last few years alone of males taking trophies and scholarships and sponsorship dollars from women. So this stops when we say no. And unfortunately, and this has to move through the courts, it really stops when the athletes who are currently competing say no. Mm-hmm. That's when change happens. It's very unfortunate. And when I say this publicly, people get really mad at me because they say the athletes shouldn't have to sacrifice. The governing bodies need to do the right thing. They will not. The governing bodies are cowardly. I watched it happen in gymnastics. They did nothing. They covered up abuse for 30 years in my beloved sport of gymnastics, and it didn't change, or at least start to change, until the athletes themselves said no more. And so today, again, another irony, because we'd been planning this, we launched just today my brand, the XXXY Athletics Fund, which is it's a nonprofit. We're doing it in partnership with IWF, and we will award monetary compensation to athletes, female athletes who are currently competing, who stand up or stand down from competing, ideally to take the sting of monetary cancellation out of the equation. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered your question. So much happened this morning in just the last few hours. And it really is all coming to a head, essentially. You've got the Title IX rewrite. You couldn't write this better in a movie. You've got the Olympics in boxing, of all sports. And my brand will just continue to stand up. And ideally, what I wanted to do in starting the brand was normalize standing up and saying, this is not okay. Because 70% of Americans agree with those of us here on this webinar right now. And yet, everyone here knows it certainly doesn't feel like 70% of Americans are standing with us. It feels very lonely to stand up and say these things.
Definitely. Glenn Lowry says something sometimes, which he says, no one is coming to save us.
That's right.
And, it's been so long since we've had to, actually fight for our rights. But I think you're absolutely right. I think we have to be the ones to stand up, and we have to support the athletes who are out there. And, and let's say they're giving up championships. They're giving up. They're giving things up to do this, but we have to do it.
Yes. And you will gain something greater. You will stand in truth. You'll be able to look yourself in the mirror. And I promise you will be on the right side of this at the end of the day. It stinks to go first on controversial issues. I've done it, 3 times now in my life, but it's necessary. And I swear you will find your people, and more people will join you as we normalize this. It's going to happen slowly and then all at once. But I feel like we're quite far away. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if May agrees with me or not. There are encouraging things that happen, like the 26 states who now have this illegal rewrite blocked. And at the same time, you see what's happening at the Olympics, being allowed to go on. I mean, my brand has been banned from various social media platforms for hate speech, for just simply encouraging girls and women to stand up for themselves. I mean, if we can exist in that world, we have a long way to go.
Yeah. May, did you have any thoughts on this?
It's funny. We do have a long way to go, but I think it's funny how far we've come. So I worked all 4 years in the Trump White House, and I know that the reputation is like, so crazy, did all these things. But the Obama administration had issued a regulation that said men should be allowed into women's domestic abuse shelters. Pretty crazy. Trump White House, Trump administration, HUD, Ben Carson never undid it. A lot of conversations, proposed a rule, never undid it. Why? How big of a problem really is this? Is this super unpopular? There wasn't the need, there wasn't the will. That would never happen. Now, if there was another Trump administration, you would not have men in women's shelters and getting federal funding for it. So in a sense, I think the political right has very much solidified their knowledge of what a woman is and what the right position is here. The political left is, I think, the group that is, they know what's right. But I think, as Jennifer says, it just feels like it's not a problem. And because it's not a problem, it's better to just use nice words and just do the pronouns and just let whatever happen because it's nice. So I don't know I'm not the expert in how to make inroads with the left, so don't ask me. But there has been a lot of progress, at least in the 20 states that are suing.
You're right, and I don't mean to suggest there hasn't. I think the challenge is, and where I think we just have to acknowledge the hill ahead of us that we have to climb, is that the left is as you describe, and their influence on the mainstream media, big business, big tech is huge. And so, that's why a brand like mine, for, putting out an ad that in some ways is fairly anodyne and just encourages women and girls to stand up for themselves. We're not out there screaming trans women are men, although that is what I believe. And we get kicked off of TikTok. We get shadow banned on Meta. It's evidence, I think, of what we're up against. And because the media and social media and big business can control what it is okay to say and what it is not okay to say, regular folks are either silent if they agree with us, or, on the wrong side of this because they're being influenced by the media, I think, in incorrect ways. So you've got these sort of competing, I think, polls, May, because you do have the Republicans and, at the RNC, there weren't louder cheers than when Eric Trump stood up and talked about, males who are 6'5" competing in women's sports. And when Trump said, we will not have men in women's sports, like those were the loudest cheers of the night almost. And yet at the same time, you have the mainstream media, you have the Olympics, you have social media all parroting the lies of the left.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think there's a big class divide there too. LinkedIn asks you what your pronouns are. And it almost feels like something that highly educated people. So like if I'm trying to present as if I'm legitimate, I would want to put my pronouns on there so that other people recognize my high classness versus Bud Light and Target were just like the middle class and the working class just destroyed those brand stock prices because they don't agree with this wokeism. So, I think that there needs to be a lot of leadership from people who either are or identify as high class, upper middle class, well educated. That it's that class divide that's really driving some of this.
Yeah, you're right. It's almost as a badge of status to say, oh, you lowly peons, you don't understand the real science. If you say the science is that if you say you're a woman, you are a woman. Biology, that's, a dated concept. It's a luxury belief in a sense, and it really is sort of asserting a degree of status. And it's really insidious. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I wonder if we could talk about some of the implications of this for, say, people working in schools. Like, for example, someone in the chat has said that she's on the Title IX committee at her school, and I know from having worked with my own school, it's like it's like budgets are cobbled together from grants and and federal money and so what exactly how can you give some examples of how this might affect people and maybe if there's any way around it?
Yeah, so the rule is massive, and so it's going to affect every aspect of the school. But let's just talk about the gender identity piece in relation to the other pieces of it. So Title IX is not it's not a criminal law. Like, it doesn't say that you can't sexually harass people. It says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And so really, it should be very simple to apply, but it's kind of been turned into a criminal law of like preventing sexual harassment in your school. Well, now sexual harassment is different. It used to be stop trying to like make women's lives difficult in school. And then schools, if women's lives are difficult, you need to have some sort of process to help these women get the education that they deserve. Well, now sexual harassment is gender identity harassment. And what does that mean? That is going to be speech police. I mean, not only do you have to watch what your teachers are saying, but sexual harassment includes student on student harassment. So you have to watch what your students are saying. And maybe it's okay if somebody misgenders somebody once. But what if somebody does it in kindergarten? What if somebody does it in fourth grade? Now that's twice in your school. These are different students, but is it pervasive now in your school? So I think that it's going to be very difficult because you've got to have a speech police in there. Then also just what if a woman complains? What if a woman says, I don't want to change in a locker room with a male? Do you now have to write up that woman for sexual harassment because she has made someone else feel uncomfortable about and unincluded based on their gender identity? So top to bottom, gender ideology is going to have to be implemented in these schools in ways that I don't think are even fathomable. Parental rights. If a parent is preventing their child from identifying, do you need to keep that information from their parents? Now, the Biden administration says we're not trying to infringe on parental rights. At the same time, the school has to not discriminate against this kid's gender identity. And if telling the parent would harm the kid's gender identity, then you can't tell the parent. So it's hard to describe in one webinar all of the gender ideology changes that are going to have to take place, but they are limitless. And let's just one quick additional thing of how it's going to interact with due process provisions. So the rule also removes due process from accused students, which I think people in their mind think, oh, someone is accused of rape, now they don't get access to the written complaint. Someone's accused of rape, they don't get access to all the evidence. That's bad as it is in this country, especially federally funded institutions need to provide due process. But it's going to interact with the gender identity provisions where let's just say you're a woman and you're uncomfortable with a male using the bathroom and somebody complains about your discomfort. Somebody doesn't like that you are a transphobe. They can now file a Title IX complaint against the woman, and the woman is not going to know what the written complaint consisted of, all the evidence against her, not going to be able to cross-examine witnesses. So all of these lack of due process things are now going to affect women who are uncomfortable with men. So unfortunately for the teachers, unfortunately for the schools, this is why a preliminary injunction was requested by the states, because there are so many changes that having 3 months to implement was not enough, especially when you're not sure if any of this is legal. So our recommendation to the states and to the schools was do not comply, because it will be very expensive for you to implement all of this. We are very certain that this is illegal, and that when it gets undone, then you're going to have to spend all this money going back. So just do not comply.
Wow. Yeah, I would add to that. We're not just fighting for women's rights here. I think we're actually literally fighting for truth and some sort of, this is the most egregious example in the culture today, I believe, of being told that to be good people, non-bigoted people, we have to further a lie. And we just can't do it. And sacrifice is necessary. And politics and policy are downstream from culture. If the culture makes it clear that's us, that's people, regular, everyday people at the grassroots level, if we all make this clear, it clear that we're not having it, it's going to go away. It will. They foisted this on us because they believe that people will either be silent or that the majority of people, they live in such a bubble that the majority of people agree with this. I do think the majority of people are silent because they don't want to deal with the name calling and the backlash and all of that. But I really feel like it's a fight for literal truth, and we just have to. People need to say no. People need to stand up and say no in their own communities, in their own schools. They need to not implement it. Do not comply. That's the only way this ends. And I'm sorry, unfortunately, sacrifice is necessary. Probably everyone on this webinar is willing to do that, but you've got to convince your friends who also agree with you and are too afraid and staying silent.
Well, I think that's really important, and I think it's important for I think it's important to have some cross-generational support because it's one thing for gnarled old people. Not that it's one thing for grown women who have had to become tough and learn to stand up for themselves, but it's another thing for young women who have been kind of steeped in this be nice kind of ethos. So it's very important, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on ways that we can do that. I know you both had the Title IX bus that you went around with, which I thought was a brilliant idea, and maybe you had some insights from that.
I think in short, what I would just stress is it is not kind to dismiss women in this way. It is not kind to allow a female boxer into the ring and let a male boxer beat the crap out of her. It is compassionate to stand up for women and girls. So yes, they weaponize our compassion and our willingness to be nice. And I think women kind of lean into that more than men. But I try to flip it for them and explain that it is indeed compassionate to stand up for women and girls.
And I think along those lines, it's share your story, because the problem is people think that it's a sort of a victimless crime. You know, who cares if a man identifies as a woman? You know, some women have boob jobs. Why can't men have boob jobs? Like that really is, I think, the thinking. And so if you share your story, if you expose what's going on, I think people can really see that. And in the Olympics, we see the Italian boxer drop to her knees and weep. Her nose was broken. And so some of these things are on the world stage, but a lot of them are not on the world stage. And a lot of them are internal feelings. The Kappa Kappa Gamma girls that I represent, who were forced to initiate a male, they had stomach ulcers. Their grades suffered because they felt unsafe. They felt unheard. They felt violated. They felt that their privacy was invaded. And so they shared their story. And IWF has a whole wing, a whole storytelling wing. You can literally just go to our website and it says, do you have a short story to tell? And put it out there. There was another woman who shared her story on Twitter. Her name is Sarah Green. She's a sorority member at the University of Kansas, and she saw that her sorority was starting to initiate men. And she asked, is this popular? What votes have been taken? She asked questions, and then she never got answers. And so she shared her story. And that, I think, that is the most powerful, just hearing, learning, and being brave enough to say it out loud.
It's such a good point, May. And if we go back in our minds to the early days of the Me Too movement, which I think for all of its excesses, there was good that happened. And I've been, fighting for athletes to train free from sexual abuse, which should be a no-brainer for close to 20 years. But that's what it was. It was women telling their stories, and it generated empathy. I think that's absolutely right. And hearing the stories of Paula Scanlon and all the women on the bus tour, I don't know how you can't be motivated to stand up after hearing these stories of how women have been put at risk, humiliated, made to feel their voice and their safety doesn't matter at all. So yeah, I think there's real power in that.
Well, and it's also, one thing that I think about is that my sons are both athletes, and they don't like this any more than the women do. And they could help. They could speak up too. And I think that's important, because I don't think anybody wants this. And then the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking is okay, boxing, but volleyball. Peyton McNabb is permanently dealing with paralysis just because a male volleyball player spiked a ball against her. It's people. We've had so much time where we've said, women and men, they're the same, they're morally equal. But there's a reality here, a physical reality that people have just lost sight of.
But they know. I believe they know. The physical fitness tests for law enforcement, for firefighters, for Secret Service, for all the things, it's different. The requirements for men and women are different. So I do think they know. They're just so kind of captured by ideology. Go ahead, May.
Yeah, no, I was just picking up on something Nancy said about, your sons know the difference between men and women's sports. And it's funny, like, men, polling wise, are less comfortable with gender ideology than women are. And I think it's just this empathy thing. Men are more willing, I guess, to just see realities, and women are willing to tell you're not fat, lie in order to make people feel good. So actually the audience maybe is men here. Like, maybe it is men that will save women's sports, because that's actually where some of this passion is. And yet, because it's not affecting men directly, I feel like some of them feel like they can't speak up. But I think it was men that changed Bud Light. Like, men have a role to play here. They have an audience, a willing audience. And I think it is important to say, like, no, this is okay for you to say. You may speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to encourage the people watching to put up some questions, so we can have both these very good people here. We can ask the questions, but before we get to the questions, I'm waiting for questions. The other thing I wanted to kind of touch on are the practicalities of this in the schools, because I've spoken to teachers, and it's, even if you go beyond the locker rooms and the sports, there's also the whole thing about the kind of changing gender identities, and I know teachers who the kids will change their gender identity from day to day, and it's almost become a game. It's like, well, can we catch you out? Which seems to make, like, if this wasn't becoming law, I mean, you could just see that it's goofing around, but it has serious consequences now.
This is the social transition thing that I think is very dangerous, because the statistics are that, if kids are identifying as something and then they don't follow through with any transition, the vast majority of them will grow out of it. I wanted to be a skater because Avril Lavigne was cool. Like there are phases that young people go through that are very genuine, and gender identity seems to be one of them, where, like I said, if you don't go through the steps of transition, then most kids are not going to continue on this gender identity path. But once you start saying, you boy are a girl and you shall therefore use the girls' bathroom, because by law I am required to give you this and treat you as this, I'm going to now give you different pronouns, then kids are stuck into it. And so once you're on that path, and so first it's bathrooms and pronouns, then you get on the girls' team, now all of a sudden you have a full identity there. And then the next step is medical. So then you're on puberty blockers, and then you're talking about top surgery and bottom surgery. So when we're talking about Title IX and we're talking about pronouns, it's not this small issue. It actually is. It is important because it is a social transition. It is a medical step to a permanent body alteration, and a lot of internal cell discord, because now all of a sudden, let's just say you did want to kind of stop doing this. Are you going to just pull out of the girls' team? Now you're part of that. So it does really make things very difficult for kids.
One of the schools here in New York, at least one, to try and dodge the issue, they just got rid of male-female bathrooms altogether, which is just, you just think, do you know nothing about teens? I mean, it's been a disaster for girls. It's been a disaster just for everyone, for the reasons you can if you use your imagination, you can think of. So it's just the whole kind of cowardice, I guess, about what the implications of these things might be. So I've got some questions that have come in specifically about non-public schools, because we were talking about public schools, but like you made the point, May, that it affects anything or anyone who's taking federal money. So I've had a question about what happens in a private, say a religious school, where they are having some federal funding. Does this how is this going to affect them? Are they going to need to implement this?
I think it's a complicated answer, because on one hand, every school that accepts federal dollars is accepting these terms. So if you can't accept the terms, then don't accept the dollars, right? Like that is, it's a contract in that sense. This is not a federal law that says all schools. This says, I'm giving you this money with a hook. Do you accept that hook? And that's part of the challenge that the states are bringing, is that it's very unclear what this hook is. And if the government is going to give you a contract, it has to be clear. So I think that the government's argument would be, you accepted the terms, now comply with the contract. On the other hand, particularly religious schools don't have to give up their religious character in order to participate in government programs. And so these are Supreme Court cases that you can't just say, I'm going to give out funds to everyone but the religious, because then you're discriminating against them. And so you could say that by basically forcing people to give up the central, just men and women's bathrooms, that there are definitely going to be some religious exemption conversations and some sort of First Amendment right conversations there. We're far from that. But like I said, because this isn't just like a blanket rule. If it was a blanket rule, then I would say that the First Amendment would absolutely protect those schools. But because it's not a blanket rule, it's a contract. And this is why a lot of religious organizations don't accept federal money for other reasons. Like I said, I was in the White House, and COVID, we were just giving out COVID money right and left. And a lot of churches and religious schools were scared to take the COVID money because they knew that they couldn't accept the contract. And so we basically said, you don't have to, no, we're not going to make you change your religious character. This money is not going to come with those strings. But it was a really big conversation. So I think it's a little bit of an unknown. But we'll have to see.
The other question that kind of follows on from that is, so if you're not a religious school, but you're in a state where there's been an injunction, do you still have to implement Title IX?
No,
you don't.
And just to give like a little preview of where I see the litigation going. So right now it's what's called a preliminary injunction. So the rule is still active. It's being implemented in half the states. But in the meantime, during litigation, the rule is paused for those plaintiffs. So if you have challenged it and you're going through litigation, it's paused for you. But the ultimate relief that all these plaintiffs are seeking is to vacate the rule, that the rule is illegal. So once the sort of trial, once the litigation is at its end and the judges make a decision, is this rule legal or is this rule not illegal? What's the status of this rule? It could very well be the case that the rule is knocked out for every state. Mm-hmm. Now there's a different option, which is parts of the rule are knocked out, which is some of the things are illegal. This gender identity stuff is illegal, but some of the rule is legal, and the court is going to have to parse through all bazillion words and figure out what stays and what doesn't stay. So there are third options where pieces of the rule. But I would say that this gender identity provision does ultimately get knocked out in all 50 states once the litigation is through. And that's another reason of do not comply. Why would you go through the mess of trying to figure this out when what's being asked for is the rule to be knocked out?
That's a really good point. Just looking at some of the comments coming in, I've had someone who is asking for advice about if you have any thoughts on raising little girls in their tweens. She said that her daughter asked her if she would protest if the issue came up in her soccer league, and the mom is saying that she's wary of. She doesn't like it, but she's wary of making her child become like an activist. And yet, here we are saying it's got to be the girl athletes who stand up. Any thoughts on that?
I have two grown children. I have two young children. My youngest is a 7-year-old girl, the only girl. What I think, and I don't know how old this child is, a tween. I wouldn't be so wary of, encouraging them to speak up in their own defense and for their own safety, even from a young age. But to make it a little less issue specific, what I tried to do with my younger children who are 9 and 7 is to encourage in them to stand up and do what they think is right and not be afraid to stand apart from their peers. I think if you can sort of train that into your children when they are young, when the moment presents itself, that will be there in their head. I think, most kids, and certainly this was true for myself, I was this incredibly obedient child, which is partly why I think I did so well in gymnastics, and sport just demanded it. There was no room for rabble rousers. It's a subjective sport. You don't get picked for the team. You don't get picked for the national team. It doesn't matter how good your scores are. They're choosing the team. And so, it's been a long road for me to kind of learn to stand up and not care what people think, and to be able to stand apart from the crowd and know that I'm doing the right thing and I can look myself in the mirror. But I think you can sort of instill that in children from a young age. My daughter, for whatever reason, has it. She does not care what anybody thinks of her. But my other children, the boys, I've had to kind of work a little harder to instill that. Interestingly, that's just her personality. So I don't think that's turning someone into an activist. I think that's turning someone into a person with moral courage. And isn't that what we want? Aren't those the children we want to raise?
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with that. Let's see if we've got anything else here. I've got someone asking, it's back on the private schools again, but are there implications for hiring and firing? Which I'm not quite sure how that would work. But
so employment is governed by Title VII,
okay.
even in schools. So Title VII is different than Title IX. It's not a contract. It is a law that any, business that has more than 50 employees has to follow Title VII. And then I think a lot of the schools are governed by state laws that are essentially the same thing. They have sex non-discrimination. So Title IX is interactive with a lot of hiring, firing, non-discrimination provisions, but Title IX governs access to educational programs. So it's going to cover students and student athlete visitors on campus. Like anytime a education program girls state, like these types of things. So it doesn't actually just have to be a student. It can be any person who is engaging in the education program, but hiring, firing, teachers, that type of thing, that's going to be governed by other sex non-discrimination provisions. But the reason Title IX is the big one is because the reading of Title IX informs a lot. So if you say that sex means gender identity here, then, and there's already a bad case on employment, there's going to be nothing left. So, and I think a lot of people do think, okay, maybe you shouldn't fire someone for being transgender, and you can have thoughts about that. I don't like the word transgender. I think it lacks a definition, but fire a man for wearing a dress. But it's very different, I think, in the education context of letting a male into a female dorm room or a sorority or a locker room. So that's why the argument is, even if in employment you've got one rule for men wearing dresses, that rule does not necessarily affect schools through Title IX. And then, all the states have to go figure out what their sex non-discrimination provisions mean.
Right. I'm wondering about, I was talking to someone about the impact of COVID on kids, and how particularly for the youngest kids, it's it's made a huge impact on their ability to socialize, their sense of themselves. And we were talking about, well, what can you do to make that better? And she was sports. Sports are so important. And it's like, I wonder if we need to have a discussion about just how important sports are in their own right, and and what a devastating thing this would be if sports are no longer realistic for women and girls.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what will happen if we don't put an end to this. Because if you are a young girl and you don't believe you'll get a fair shot at making the team or at winning, because, and while the other side keeps saying, oh, it's fringe, they keep saying it. But I mean, there was a cycling competition just last weekend, I believe, and all three of the top slots, they were pairs. So all three of the top team winners had a male on the team. So not fringe. And if you're a young girl or an adolescent or a young woman and you don't feel that you're going to get a fair shot, why would you try? At a certain point, girls will stop playing and we'll have one category. It'll be sports and it'll be all males. That is really where this goes. I'm not a huge fan of slippery slope arguments, but I do honestly believe that is what will happen. And I agree with you that reminding folks of all the benefits that sports provide to young women. But again, if this lie stays centered, that if you say you're a woman, it won't help. That's the lie we have to dislodge and really just, not use the language, not have any sort of patience or tolerance, because once the lie gets in, this is what happens. Once we use the pronouns, once we say trans women are women because we're bullied into it, you can't then say those people are not allowed in women's sports and spaces. You've already said they're women. So you cannot play the language games in any way, shape, or form. And so, yes, Nancy, I agree. We need to continue to celebrate and remind folks, but it won't matter if the lie stays at the center of this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So apparently the little girl mentioned earlier is 9. So just seems like a good age to be teaching these lessons. I wonder if there's anything we can do in the meantime so that girls can continue to play sports in places where the boys have been let in. I mean, I was thinking, do we have to have Negro leagues for women in order for these girls to be able to compete? I mean, I hate the idea, but maybe we need to find ways to recognize the achievements of these girls that just like bypass the whole schools thing.
I just think women and girls need to stand down en masse and push back en masse. I honestly, I'll go back to my sort of advocacy within gymnastics. For many years, I was at this, trying to alert the powers that be, the USA Gymnastics, the USOPC, that this was happening and it was widespread in the sport. But until the currently competing athletes told their stories and demanded change, and ultimately demanded that governing body heads get fired, not just in the United States, but in other countries around the world, the UK. There were investigations because the athletes demanded it. And so, I don't want to create a parallel universe. I want the one we had that was grounded in truth. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, I do think some sacrifice on the part of the athletes is necessary. And I think it just needs to be a growing and ultimately massive movement for these women to stand down and say no. Mm-hmm. Not my sports.
I agree with you. Jennifer, will you be adding children's sizes to your line?
It's a good question. We're so young and it's really hard to add. I don't want to bore you with the intricacies of retail and apparel development. We do have a few girls products coming for our holiday line, so look out for that. And my daughter is 7 and she is able to wear the extra small tops and she's pretty little. So, you could try that, especially with some of the t-shirts. They're her favorite t-shirts at this point. And like I said, she's 7 and she's not like a big 7-year-old. She's pretty tiny.
Great. So, so we're getting kind of close to the end now. We got like 10 minutes. Are there any takeaways that you guys want to leave people with? Preferably like 5 minutes each.
Yeah, I guess on Title IX, one thing that we haven't discussed, so I just want to make people aware of it, is that presidents are not kings. They can't just rewrite laws, and nor is everyone resourced enough to bring litigation like we've seen. The real answer here is Congress is responsible for the laws. And I know that Congress doesn't like to do very much, but like this is a real easy one. So when Newt Gingrich was speaker, they created this device. It's called the Congressional Review Act. And Congress puts one sentence together that says that regulation, we're deleting it. We're not in favor of that regulation. And the regulation goes away. And not only that, but a future administration can't pass a similar one. So the regulation goes away forever unless Congress undoes its ban on it. So the Congressional Review Act against this Title IX regulation has been introduced and passed in the House. Republicans in the House. No Democrat voted for it. You know, in theory, if you had, so John Ossoff is a Democrat from Georgia. He voted against putting a radical Democrat who thinks males should be in women's prisons. He voted against her from being on the bench. There are some Democrat votes that have recognized sex differences. You could, in theory, have the Senate pass it. Of course, Biden would veto it, and you could, in theory, override that. It's very unlikely, right? It's like a total fantasy, but it's almost like people don't know about it, and people aren't requesting this from their senators. And it's so easy to just like shoot off an email to your senator. So if you are in a blue state, if you've got a blue representative, if you've got a Democrat senator, it's worth at least mentioning this to them. And of course, I think it's also worth punishing somebody who does not do this very basic thing for your children at the ballot box. But, that's a personal decision. I think the very minimum that you can do, that everyone can do, not everyone can bring a lawsuit, but everyone can say, hey, I need you to vote for the Title IX Congressional Review Act.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there, May? Do you have resources where people can like a Title IX center where people can go? I know you talked about the thing earlier with the click and.
Yes. So we have IWF has a Title IX Resource Center. Let's see. And that's a lot of information about what's going on with Title IX, parental rights, that sort of thing. So if you I hate Google because Google is the enemy, but like if you do iwf.org/title-9-resource-center, so I can, send that afterward. If there's a way to even follow me on Twitter, I can post that.
Yeah.
So yes, we do have a Title IX Resource Center. And like I said, we're going to have a full map. And then we also have a case page on Alabama versus Cardona, which is one of the big lawsuits against the Title IX regulation. So if anybody's interested in some of what like the legal back and forth is, what the legal arguments are, what judges are saying, I'll go, searching IWF Alabama v. Cardona. That's going to be a good resource there. And then there's tons of media all related to Title IX. So yeah, there's a lot to get up to speed on. So it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. But those are two places to look.
And what about people? Any thoughts on people on school boards who are trying to give some guidance about how they should respond to this? I know you said don't comply, but are there any specific strategies you can think of to have this discussion with people who may not have thought about it very deeply? And that's for both of you.
So I think the resource that I like in talking to school boards is several state superintendents have done this, but Louisiana was the first. So there is a letter that the Louisiana state superintendent of schools sent of saying, do not comply. And I think that it was a very succinct, like, this is something that's very new, very untested, very expensive, and very dangerous. And it's also subject to legal challenge. It's not going to survive. And that's why I am directing, as the superintendent of the schools, do not follow this. And I think using that letter is a good model to ask local school boards, because he kind of does a good job of laying that out. So again, this is just something you can search of, like, Louisiana State School Board Letter Title IX.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
My feeling, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, May, is that most people, so I'm not going to talk about this from a legal standpoint, I'm going to talk about it from a culture standpoint, but most people who claim to be on the side of trans women are women are literally just parroting headlines and talking points, and they haven't really thought about this or read as much as we have. They don't know that Europe has just pulled back on the transitioning of minor, the transitioning. I don't like to use the word, so I'll put it in quotes, because you can't actually change your sex. All of Europe has just basically made it illegal to use puberty blockers, or not all of Europe, but most of the Northern European countries, who were first, by the way. They went first, so it's no surprise they're the first to see the harms, and they're now the first to completely reverse it, and we're dismissing that as a country. Most people don't know that. I think most people don't understand that what this Title IX rewrite involves and includes, and so I find that sitting with people and having long and very difficult conversations can sometimes be useful. Oftentimes they're just ill prepared to have them, and they don't have much to say to push back. Maybe you won't change their mind. I think the desire to stand with the group and kind of wear this status as a badge of honor that we talked about earlier is very strong. But I guarantee you, if you have one hard conversation, that seed is planted, and they're going to have another one at some point. And so, I just encourage people in their own lives, because everybody here, if you are here and you're listening and you're asking questions, and you're on our side. And so your job is to go into your own communities and convince and influence your friends, your neighbors, the other parents at your school to listen and to come to common sense, because you can't do it alone. You really need to kind of influence and bring your community along with you. And so, and support those who do, support this organization, support the organization that May works for, support Icon, support our brand, support the fund that we're starting that encourages female athletes to stand up, wear the t-shirt. Every time I wear one of these shirts to the soccer game on the weekend, a mom comes up to me and she leans in and she says, I agree with you, and I said, then you have to say it out loud. You have to. You don't have the luxury of being silent at this point. So, that's what I tell people. You don't have to blow your life up the way I did around COVID, but you do have the chance and the opportunity to influence your friends and your neighbors and your community. And I think you need to do it. And I'm assuming everyone here is probably already doing that. I would just say keep doing it.
So that I agree with that so much. I think this is, you think back to the civil rights movement, you think of civil disobedience. This is our moment for that. So I just want to mention a couple of other things that are coming up. Genspect is hosting a ROGD awareness conference. ROGD stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria Day Conference, which is taking place in Chicago on August 16th. And Jennifer will be there. And we have lots of other exciting guests. So that's coming up, and we'll put details of that when we post the recording of this. The other thing is we talked about ways of having that conversation. Our next webinar is coming up on August 22nd, and we will be discussing the Urgent Conversation Toolkit, which was put together by Restore Childhood. It's an urgent conversation about gender, and the really nice thing about that is it's just all the facts, all the data, everything that parents need to know to be able to, to give to people, to help them to make up their mind and to help to make simple points, which, when you get down to it, these are simple points. And we need to have the courage to make them. And I just want to thank you, May and Jennifer, so much for coming along to this. I really, really appreciate it. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Okay.